Hi Geography 40 students, thanks for tuning in to Lecture 2 of this course called Daisy World and Introduction to Systems. Well, first of all, you might be wondering why you're listening to this lecture in the comfort of your own home rather than in the classroom. And to start out with, there's a very practical reason for that. On Tuesday, I will be in Scotland, where I've been invited to give a lecture on research involving interactions between the hydrosphere and the biosphere, so very much an Earth system science topic. But I decided to use this absence as an opportunity to try a strategy that's being advocated by people who study how learning actually works. Some of you might have been exposed to this before. It's called the flipped classroom. And the idea is that you use your time at home when you would ordinarily be studying to actually watch a lecture, which you could do at your own pace. You could pause this and go back and hear things again. You could take a break in the middle, go have a bowl of ice cream, and then come back to it when you're a little more well-rested. But then you use your time in the classroom to actually get your studying done and the reinforcement that leads to long-term learning. In the classroom, you'll have an opportunity to grapple with problems where you could bounce ideas off of your peers or ask questions to the instructors, here are your GSIs, in the classroom. So we'll give this a try for this lecture, and if it comes off as being successful, we'll try it several other times throughout the semester. Now, getting back to the matter at hand, today we're going to tackle the systems component of Earth system science. This is a really important lecture because it lays the groundwork for a lot of the other understanding that's going to emerge from this course. With a basic understanding of how systems operate, you'll have the tools that you need to understand why, under small increases or gradual increases in CO2, you might expect the Earth to behave in threshold-like ways or catastrophic ways. You might have heard of the possibility of a catastrophic melting of the Greenland ice sheet and a very rapid increase in sea level. That would be one example. Other examples are that in Earth's past, we've gone into and out of ice ages at a very rapid rate. So today is going to give you the tools for understanding why these extreme nonlinearities happen as a consequence of processes that occur in a lot of different systems. The reading for today is both a website. This website on Daisy World really covers the example that we'll be covering in the second part of class. But then there's a few pages to read in your textbook, too, that will complement the first part of lecture today, which is a basic introduction to systems, including definitions, an understanding of what couplings, feedback loops, equilibrium states, and perturbations and forcings are. So in your reading, really focus on pages 6 through 9 in terms of the textbook reading. It's not very much, but it should be helpful. So today, as well as in future classes, I'm going to start out the lecture by exposing you to some of the vocabulary that we'll be discussing at great length in the rest of the lecture. So this part's going to move kind of fast, but it should serve as a useful study guide for you later on. After I go through some of the vocabulary that we'll be covering, we're going to go through some of the objectives of the course in terms of the essential concepts that you should be familiar with at the end of this lecture. So both of these together should be your study guides as you're preparing for the midterm and the final exam later on. So system is a word that a lot of you probably have an intuitive understanding of. This definition today is going to formalize that intuition. A system is a collection of independent entities that interact with each other and exhibit emergence. Well, what do we mean by emergence? Emergence is a phenomenon that arises uniquely as a result of interactions between entities. And I use the word uniquely because it's not something that we can predict readily just by knowing the rules governing the behavior of those individual entities. Emergence is a large-scale phenomenon that comes out as a surprise. One example might be if you've ever seen flocks of starlings, they could form these amazing shapes in the sky. And I actually encourage you to go online onto YouTube and Google starling flocks. So they form these shapes in the sky that seem to behave according to their own rules, whereas individual starlings are just trying to follow the birds that are immediately around them. So that shape is not something that you would predict just by knowing the rules governing individual starlings. We might describe this as the sum being greater than the parts. So moving back to these definitions, stores are components of systems that are containers or reservoirs for the mass or energy within a system. Fluxes are transfers of that mass or energy between different components of the system, or between the system and the outside world. We'll be talking about state variables, which are essentially numbers that describe a fundamental attribute or the state of the system. Things like temperature, population, pressure, water content. Feedback is a process that's characterized by bidirectional effects of components or state variables of the system on each other. These feedbacks might be positive feedbacks, which are destabilizing, or negative feedbacks, which are stabilizing. Couplings are one-way interactions between two components or state variables of a system, the effect of one thing on another. This could be a positive effect, where an increase in one component, such as carbon dioxide, increases the other, such as temperature, or a negative, where an increase in one component actually leads to a decrease in the other. Now we could represent couplings with coupling diagrams, which are a depiction of the system's state variables, usually represented by boxes, and the nature, whether positive or negative, of the couplings between them. So one simple example, just going back to this example of temperature and carbon dioxide, might be a representation of CO2 as one box and temperature, our other state variable, as the other box. And there's a positive effect of carbon dioxide on temperature, and so we would represent that as an arrow. So this is a very simple unidirectional coupling diagram. Another type of diagram that we'll be exploring today is a phase diagram, which is a plot of the value of one of the system's state variables against another. Each unidirectional coupling would be represented as a single line on the phase diagram. Recall, going back to our definition of feedback, that feedback is a bidirectional coupling. So a feedback would be depicted on a phase diagram with two different lines. And we'll go through that example later on, but let's just start simple here and draw a simple phase diagram that involves temperature and carbon dioxide, which I'll put on the x-axis. And so when carbon dioxide is high, we know that temperature is high. And when carbon dioxide is low, we know that temperature is low, so we might just represent this on a phase diagram as a straight line. This is a very simplified version of reality, but it's a good example of a phase diagram. We're also going to discuss the concept of equilibrium, which is a condition in which the state of the system is not changing over time. Now, equilibria can be stable, which means that the system will return to that state after it's been perturbed, or that equilibrium could be unstable, where the system goes to another state altogether after it's been perturbed. And then some other words that we'll be using are luminosity. It's simply a fancy way of saying brightness, for example, of the sun. We'll also be using the term albedo, which is how reflective a surface is. Light colors have high albedo and reflect heat or energy. Dark colors have low albedo and absorb heat or energy. So moving on to the concept goals of the lecture today. By the end of this lecture, you'll become familiar with how to represent systems with coupling diagrams that show positive or negative interactions between variables. You'll be able to evaluate complicated coupling diagrams to determine whether the feedback process that the couplings depict are positive or negative. And then the next level of complexity is that you'll use your knowledge of couplings to develop phase diagrams that depict the system's equilibria, and you'll be able to evaluate whether those equilibria are stable or unstable. And in doing so, you'll be able to understand how stable and unstable equilibria arise from negative or positive feedbacks, respectively. So let's start simple with a basic introduction to systems. And we'll talk about components of a system. We'll talk in more detail about couplings and feedback loops, equilibrium states, and then finally forcings and perturbations. So what is a system? Well, a system is just a set of diverse, interrelated components. These components function as a whole, Oftentimes they exhibit this emergence that we've talked about, such as with the flocks of starlings. And those individual components are linked by flows and fluxes of energy or matter. Together, energy and matter constitute what we might refer to here as, my stylus here is acting up a little bit. I apologize for that. We'll get this working. So, information. Okay. I might just have to use my finger later on to write on my iPad. So let's talk in more detail now about components of a system. Components of a system include a matter reservoir. So matter here is mass or volume. An energy reservoir such as heat energy or potential energy. A set of states or attributes that characterize the system, and examples here would be the temperature and the CO2 concentrations that we've talked about already. Another good example would be pressure. This is another thing that we'll talk about a lot in this course. And then finally, systems often include subsystems. So examples of this might be the geography department within UC Berkeley, UC Berkeley within the collection of universities within the UC system, or the UC system within the collection of US universities. Okay, moving along. Let's go through an example. So think for a moment about whether the human body is a system. Think about whether there's a matter reservoir. What is that? Is there an energy reservoir? What states could describe the system, and what types of subsystems are there? So think about that for a moment. We could go through this. So matter reservoirs within the human body. There's a lot of potential answers here, but some examples might be cells or tissues. The energy reservoir might be body heat or fat storage. The state of the human body is something that is measured every time you go to the doctor's office and they take your blood pressure. So they might take your blood pressure, your temperature. They also measure your weight. All of these are attributes that fall into the category of system state. So there's a number of different things you could put down here. And then in terms of subsystems, we can think about the nervous system, the cardiovascular system, you name it, the digestive system, the respiratory system, and so on. So the human body is most definitely a system. A system is also defined by how it exchanges energy and mass with its surroundings. And there are three types of systems that we're going to talk about: open systems, closed systems, and isolated systems. So open systems are systems that exchange both energy and matter. So we could put check marks here. One example might be an open pot on a stove. So here this open pot is exchanging heat and water vapor with the surroundings, which would be the air surrounding the pot. An example, so moving on to closed systems exchange energy, so we could put a check mark here, but not matter. So an example of a closed system might be a pot on the stove with a lid. So it's exchanging heat, but it's not exchanging water vapor. And an isolated system, you might guess, exchange neither energy nor mass with the surrounding environment. So a good example of an isolated system might be a thermos, a perfectly insulated thermos. Okay? thermos. Okay, so this terminates this first portion of the lecture. Tune in to the next portion.